So welcome everyone to class, the Buddhist Path of Awakening course. As we work our way through Chogyam Trungpa's The Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma, we're nearing the end of Volume 1, The Path of Individual Liberation, the Hinayana Path. And we're going to deal with three chapters rather. So, Barry, do you want to take it away with the first chapter? We can't hear you, Barry.
Hello?
Hello, now we can hear you.
Okay. How about that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'd like to start with a bow. If you care to join me. I have to say at the onset that going through this chapter, I thought I had a pretty good take on it, but then as I continued to go back over it, there just was more and more depth there and more interest. And at this point, we'll see how it goes. Okay. So we're being presented here with another schema, another way of organizing the teachings, and that is the 5 paths. And only 2 are mentioned here, the path of accumulation, the path of unification. And this first chapter is about the path of accumulation. In fact, it's about the lesser of the 3 paths of accumulation. So John is going to go on from here. But I found that there's a lot here. So okay. Well, first of all, he says in the reading, on the lesser path of accumulation, you are predominantly working with the 4 foundations of mindfulness and with shamatha vipassana practice. Meditation practice at this level is a way of developing greater mental and psychological sharpness so that dharmas could be perceived properly. Now, the path of accumulation is the accumulation of dharmas. And dharmas are, in this sense, in this context, are teachings, are knowledge, experience that you gain, understandings. And this has to be done through mindfulness, awareness, meditation, both shamatha and vipassana, in other words, on the cushion and in real life. And by following this practice, you start to develop more and more accuracy in what you see and what you experience. What we're starting to do here is picking apart the elements of our experience. And that's why it's important to see your thoughts as they arise rather than pushing them away or ignoring them. Seeing your thoughts and taking an interest in them. And that's where you can start to discover the truth of these teachings in your own experience. Now, first of all, most of us have come to the path without even having a clear sense of when we're dreaming or when we're awake. But at this point, we're starting to gain more and more awareness of that. It's not about enlightenment at this point. But what it is about is beginning to understand the nature of samsara, which is where we all are now. That this relates to the first noble truth, which is the truth of suffering. It also relates to the first stanza of our lineage chant, saying that renunciation is the foot of meditation. The original translation of that was revulsion is the foot of meditation. And in this reading, he does not shy away from that at all. So, at this point, our understanding of what we're getting into is still somewhat vague and uncertain. I mean, after all, if any of us truly understood what being enlightened, awakened was, then we'd be there. So, we're taking on faith. Now, he presents the three ways of learning. There's hearing, contemplating, and meditating. And we have gone over this in the past, but just briefly, hearing is what's happening right now. The teachings are being presented verbally, or hearing them. Can also refer to reading. Contemplating is thinking about it. And then in meditation, that's kind of where the rubber hits the road. Now he says that this prepares you for further hearing because your mind is more readied. You're able to hear more teachings. So it is a constant ongoing process. That is how it works on the path of accumulation. That, in other words, our ability to take in the teachings continues to grow as we go along. As our understanding develops and expands. And now he presents us with the three marks of existence. He says, one outstanding discovery at the first level of the path of accumulation is the understanding of the three marks of existence. So this is just a view of learning the Dharma at this stage of the path. But it's interesting that he introduces this by referring to this as a discovery. So this is not a matter of memorizing another enumerated list. It's a description of something that is experienced in the practice and is presented here to provide an understanding when you do encounter it. It's an important point. He says, this is by no means the result of ordinary speculative mind. It is definitely a product of the sitting practice of meditation, which is the highest way of learning about the Dharma. And then he also goes on to say that at this point, we're not talking about any kind of transcendental experience or anything. Now, impermanence. The experience of impermanence can happen when you begin to develop faith in the teachings. At the same time that you experience the value of the teaching, there is an awareness that the circumstances that make it possible to pursue this path may change. So you become more and more aware that there's not much solidity there. Things are changing. And in our meditation, as we see our thoughts come and go, our experience changing, we begin to become more clearly aware of the fact that in our immediate experience, everything is changing all the time. You know, this is the nature of impermanence. And he actually I think he actually says in the reading this is kind of the grosser level of the understanding of impermanence, because as we start to understand this, how everything is changing, we can also start to understand how our experience of it, the meanings that we take from things, the way we interpret things is also changing all the time. And that gives us less and less to hold on to. And that can lead to some anxiety. After all, everything's changing. This anxiety is best answered by simply returning to your practice. And to the refuge of the three jewels, for that matter, of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. He says, rather than either competing with the teacher or having an inferiority complex, you simply experience the rare occasion that you have, this rare opportunity. Because after all, we are in a rare opportunity here, having discovered these teachings and having the ability, the wherewithal, to devote the time and energy to it, and also being in a place where we can take them in and understand them. I'm going to move on a little bit here in the reading and talk about egolessness. He says, in the contemplative tradition, we do not talk about ego as consisting of the 5 skandhas or the 8 types of consciousness. We do not approach ego philosophically. It is our immediate experience. Later on he talks about the different traditions and how some of the traditions in Tibet are very intellectually oriented. But here on the path of accumulation, it's experiential. It's the experience you can gain through meditation. And in pursuing this, as some of the clouds start to part, you can say, and we come out of our dreams a bit, we can begin to see all of these thoughts and even our feelings as stories, narrative, repetitive stories. He says, basically, ego is a psychological bank or pool in which we store memories and ideas so that whenever we are running out of external entertainment, we can churn them out and entertain ourselves. And it is very compelling entertainment. That's why we have to spend so much time practicing. It is in meditation that we can begin to see these stories for what they are and start to cut through the story. Start to break the chain of reaction of feelings. And all of these stories are feeding and solidifying the ego, the sense of self. If you are seeing your thoughts as they arise in meditation rather than pushing away, you will begin to see that they are all about the legend of I. I did this. I will do that. This happened to me. I achieved this. I failed at that. If only I had. But somehow they're comforting, even if they're painful. They're reassuring, familiar, like rereading a favorite book. Something you can depend on. It gives you a sense of solidity. And this self that we construct and tend to in our dreams, we tend to see it somehow as separate from ourselves, like a companion. We see ourselves doing this, doing that, responding to this and that. All of this is the operation of ego. And by starting to have the experience of impermanence, the fact that everything's changing, we start to then get a hint at the falsehood of ego, that like something just isn't lining up here, and we start to question it. He says, having realized impermanence, the experience of no ground, you see that the idea of having somebody to keep you company is fiction. That experiencing the truth of impermanence starts to unravel that construct. And once again, it is only in meditation that we can begin to truly experience this. He says, egolessness from a contemplative point of view is the alarm created by the experience of empty heart, the double take created from the realization of impermanence, which is what I've just been speaking about. Impermanence. It leaves you groundless. It can stir up a lot of feelings, fear, anger. He says at this point, or he says, not at this point, this is an actual emotional experience, very close to the heart and very desperate. And actually, I'm going to relate a story from my own experience because it goes to this very directly. That a guy named Lama Chodon, a Tibetan teacher, came to Westchester to give refuge vows a while ago. And he interviewed each of us beforehand, and in my interview, I don't recall much of it, but one thing he said to me was, you have to surrender your past. And when I first heard this, I wasn't quite sure what that meant, but then as I thought about it, and it started to sink in, I actually started to kind of do that for a moment. And I started to realize without my past, without knowing that I'm the guy that did this and this happened to me, and suddenly I felt this intense like vertigo. I felt like the bottom dropping out from under me. And what that was is an experience of egolessness, of emptiness, of impermanence, right there. Now, I want to point out that everyone's experience is different. But I just thought it might be helpful to convey that as an example. So anyway, the interesting part in this teaching, beyond this other stuff, is the way impermanence and egolessness leads to suffering, which to me at first seemed kind of counterintuitive. But you see, starting to dismantle the ego takes away our security blanket. All of the dreams that we spend so much time in are comforting, even if they are painful. That the castle in the air that we spend so much time living in begins to crumble, and the result is not nirvana. And that can make us cranky. He mentions anger several times. So in meditation, as we begin to lose respect for our dreams and stories as we see them, we become more and more aware of all of the anxiety, the anger, the longing that is there. The whole thing is claustrophobic. It's musty. And as ideas of permanence and solidity of our world, of ourselves, begin to dissolve, suffering does not. It remains. In fact, it is this point that we begin to truly see our suffering, and it's everywhere. It's everywhere. He says suffering is the most real thing in one's realm of experience. You see, we can start to have the experience of impermanence and egolessness. But suffering does not go away like that. And it comes in many flavors. Physical pain usually triggers some kind of psychological suffering, sometimes emotional suffering as well. There is suffering brought on by loss of a job, a lover. More commonly, the everyday suffering of discontent, anxiety, longing, frustration, or just uneasiness because things are not as they should be. He says, as practitioners begin to discover that there is no permanent experience and no ego, they realize that the whole world is made only out of suffering because there's nothing to hold on to, no solid ground. He goes on to talk about that trying to run away from suffering is not a good idea, or trying to avoid it. The way you would avoid it is by going back into your dreams, but at this point, that's kind of ruined for us because we've started to see just how nasty they are. So relax and see it, and you will begin to see that is in fact pervasive. He says the realization of suffering is the starting point. It is the seed of awakening. That is why it is called the first noble truth. It is for ordinary folks, people on the path of accumulation, people from the streets, so to speak, just plain folks like us. I mean, after all, if there was no suffering in your life, you probably wouldn't be here. I'm going to move ahead a little bit here. How are we doing? Yes, I'm running long, so... Okay. Yeah, there's much more here about the different traditions and everything. Okay. I just say that at the end of this reading, he says, having developed a true understanding of the Four Noble Truths and the three marks of existence, a student may be inspired to renounce the samsaric world. So, it's not clear to us where this is headed, but it becomes clear that we do not want to continue on in samsara. This may seem goal-oriented, and it is, but that's okay at this point if the goal is following the path of accumulation. This is, I see it as a statement of the First Noble Truth in the starkest terms. Life is suffering. And at the end he says, if you try to run away from samsara, the very act of running away becomes in itself a samsaric act. Renunciation has to be unconditional renunciation. John? Still muted.
Thank you, Barry. And can you change it so that I'm on the screen? For some reason, it's not doing it. Thank you. So hello, everybody. I thought this chapter was quite extraordinary. And one of the main reasons is the way he treated impermanence. That it has two aspects. The outer, you might say, and the inner. The outer aspect is that cars rust, bodies decay, the weather changes, the wind blows, people speak, the words come out and change. All that is the outer aspect of impermanence. But what he particularly talked about too a bit in this chapter was the inner or psychological aspect of impermanence, which is that your thoughts about yourself and the world are constantly changing. You wake up in the morning and perhaps you feel depressed, or perhaps you feel elated, and then you have some breakfast and it changes and your feelings change, or your partner says something to you and your mood changes and you see things differently. Our view, our psychological view of the world is changing instant by instant. And so there's nothing that is staying constant. Not only is the external world changing, slowly, rapidly, cars go by, we age, whatever it might be, but internally, our view, the way we see the world, is changing so fast, instant by instant. I mean, this is an extraordinary experience of impermanence, and it's one that really only comes to a person practicing meditation, especially shamatha vipassana meditation, awareness practice, because we begin to become aware of our minds. And it really happens when you give up the goal orientation of wanting to achieve some particular state, a state of awareness, a state of peace, I don't care what it is, and are simply watching whatever it is that is arising and passing away in the present moment. The objects of the five senses, obviously. As you turn your head, visual objects change. But also interior, your thoughts, your feelings, your predilections, your prejudices, for and against, all of this arising and passing away in the present moment. We're living in a constant kaleidoscope. This is the meaning of impermanence as he presents it here. Egolessness then comes because when you try to find ego, it's just another thought, another one of the many that are passing continuously. One's lost in this stream, this, not even a stream, a turbulence of thought and emotion, of mental events of all kinds, some of which are about me, some of which are about you, some of which are about them, who knows? And so the idea of there being a center becomes harder and harder to sustain. A center like me, I. It's just another dream, another thought. And when we begin to watch the mind dispassionately, without having any agenda, without having any goal, but just seeing the way the mind is constantly shifting and changing our view, it becomes questionable if there's any hour or my. So suffering in this case comes from wanting to hold on to permanence, the permanence of belief in an other, which is what Buddhism calls theism, the belief in some external entity that one can rely on, and the belief in oneself. Because the main way that we come to any idea of self is by saying, looking at that out there, oh, if that's there, then I'm here, the observer of it. And we're constantly engaged in that project of I other. All of our emotions, all of our mental games, all of our emotional games of love and hate and jealousy and all that goes to prove that there is an I in here who is engaged in them. And I always quote this story about Trungpa Rinpoche, that once someone asked him what the purpose of fear is. And he said, the purpose of fear is to prove that I exist. It's all to prove that I exist. All of these mental games that we play, which are full of suffering. So the very nature of I is suffering, that we're trying to prove that something that doesn't exist is there. And the more we become aware of the impermanence of the world, the more we realize that this is the case. And the way in which we do this is through study to some degree, contemplation to some degree, but most of all, through awareness practice, in which we sit, we are aware, we're working with our awareness, and we are seeing absolutely everything as it arises and passes, especially including what arises and passes inside, without agenda, without even the agenda of trying to be aware, because that's another ego agenda that blinds us, but we just see it. So we slowly change from the beginning or initial path of accumulation, this is the first of the 5 paths, to the middle path of accumulation. He said, you're actually moving away from theism. Theism is the belief in I and other, that these actually exist. If that's out there, then I'm here. Therefore, I want to believe in God, because if God's there, therefore I'm here as his worshiper, his or her worshiper. And it's just a construct, a mental construct, to try and keep this, the worshiper, the observer, the seer, going. Because when we stop it, that disappears. When we stop that back and forth, then the I, me, loses its function. So he says you're moving away from ordinary religious practices of trying to save yourself and reaching a higher level of spirituality, which is another ego game. You cease to have the idea of a savior. You are actually moving away from theism. And this is the journey towards the Mahayana, which we're coming to in a few weeks. And he mentions the danger of winding up in the God realm by means of meditation. This is looking for pleasure through meditation, where you go into a trance state and achieve a kind of peace and stasis. But he says the saving grace is prajna, which comes from the vipassana meditation, this awareness meditation. The awareness meditation of vipassana, resting here in space, seeing it all rising and passing. It develops prajna. Prajna is intelligence, super intelligence. It's the intelligence that sees the arising and passing of all these events, which are called dharmas. These events, thoughts, winds, people, everything. So he says that is one of the outstanding qualities of Buddhism. It sows the seed of intelligence in students' minds, so they know how to separate those two approaches to the spiritual path. The two approaches being the theistic approach of trying to solidify oneself by means of believing in a solid other out there, as opposed to one approach, and the approach of awareness, of vipassana, of developing prajna. Prajna means super intelligence. Pra is an intensifier. Jnana is the root of the word to know. So it's super knowing, clarity. And then he talks, there's this whole section on the practice of the 16 incantations, this is the first and the only time I've ever seen this. So I guess I wasn't there for this teaching at this seminary, and I haven't heard of it since. It wasn't maintained, but it's interesting, certainly. And it's especially interesting that it intensifies our understanding of these three marks of existence: suffering, egolessness, and the path, impermanence. And he says the first one is just sort of the normal take on these four. Suffering should be seen, it should be appreciated. And what it is, the real suffering, is the inability that we have to maintain ourselves, this self, this idea of a self, in any way that's secure and solid. And the origin of suffering should be avoided. And the way we avoid that is through meditation, especially shamatha. The goal should be attained. The goal is nirvana, peace, release from suffering. And the path should be actualized, which is the path of meditation. And we should be practicing meditation, especially vipassana meditation, and especially, as he goes on here, shamatha vipassana meditation at this stage. And we'll come to why. And then the second set has to do with shifting one's perception, that suffering should be realized as impermanent, that all of these things should be realized as impermanent, because everything ultimately is impermanent. There is no solid ground to hold on to, not a bit. Every single thing in one's experience is changing instant by instant. Your perceptions of the objects of the five senses is changing instant by instant. And then your thoughts about them, which are even more profound. I mean, where are you if your thoughts are constantly changing instant by instant? Where am I? We're nowhere. The third set of incantations is that all these things, the suffering, its origin, the goal, and the path should be seen clearly. And the way we see it clearly is through the practice of vipassana, clear seeing, what we were doing tonight before we started the class. And the fourth set of incantations, this is profound. There is no suffering, no origin of suffering, no goal, and no path. And this is now the Mahayana. This is Shunyata. This is a recap of the Heart Sutra, which it ends with no goal, no suffering, no origin of suffering, no cessation of suffering, and no path. And that's a quote from the Heart Sutra by the Buddha, in which he lays out Shunyata and really the whole basis of the Mahayana path. So that fourth incantation is our movement into the Mahayana. And he says, this is the final statement of the Vipassana experience, that we could cut the root of confusion altogether by coming awake, by becoming aware. And simply by resting in this awareness, which is here, it's part of us, it's our foundation, it's the essence of who we are. And by resting in this ultimate fundamental awareness, we cut the root of confusion. Confusion is all about looking for something out there, trying to find an answer, trying to find some kind of solidity to hold on to. And we look and we look and we look, and that is the confusion. And when we come back and just rest in this awareness, this clear awareness in the present moment. And if you don't understand that, we should have a conversation, because this is the foundation of the path. But I think most people do. He says, why does this formula to cut the root, the cause and effect of being born in the lower realms? It's in all the realms. Now, I want to also tell you, we've done this before, but I'll reiterate. There are three basic areas of samsara, confusion, unenlightenment. And these are called the three dhatus, or it's sometimes translated as worlds, spheres. Dhatu can mean space, depending on the context. Dhatu is a word that's used in many contexts. But the three that he's talking about here, being the three structures of samsara, are the realm or the world of desire, the Kama Dhatu. Maybe you've heard about the Kama Sutra. It's the Hindu text that tells you how to make love. Kama means desire. And so the lowest of these three areas is the Kama Dhatu, and it consists of 6 realms. The lowest is the hell realm, and then moving up, we have the hungry ghost realm, the animal realm, the human realm, the realm of the jealous gods, and the God realm. And this God realm is the lowest of the God realms, because now we're going to move up into the second Dhatu. We had the Kama Dhatu, the world of desire, and now we move above the God realm into the Dhatu of pure form. It's called Rupa Dhatu. And this is a God realm. It's a God realm in the sense that one is no longer in a body. It's a purely mental state. It's a state of concentration. And if there are stories, supposedly, about yogis who practice these concentrations, and their bodies become so irrelevant that they just wither away until all that is left of that yogi is a palpitating heart. And the yogi is completely stuck in what is called the realm of pure form. And it has 4 different levels, which I'm not going to go into now, but they're just more and more subtle. And they're very pleasurable. But they are made through effort. And so they will decay, just like anything else. Just like you build up your muscles by going to the gym, and then eventually you get old and stop going to the gym, and your muscles just disappear. And it's the same thing with these dhatus, the concentrations of these dhatus. They're called the dhyanas in Sanskrit, the jhanas in Pali, in the language of Southeast Asia. So then above that is the arupa dhatu. That means the formless realm, the formless sphere. And these are more concentrations that are subtler and subtler. I forget all of them. There's the concentration on pure space. I think that's the 4th. And then the 3rd is the concentration on pure consciousness. And then the 2nd is the concentration on not this and not that. And then the last and the ultimate is the concentration on not this and not that. So you can see it's getting pretty thin. And there are stories of great teachers. Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, who died in about 1990 and was a teacher of Trungpa Rinpoche. In fact, his picture's on the wall behind me here. And there are stories of him finding yogis in caves who'd gotten stuck in the dhyanas in one of these formless or form states, and waking them up and telling them, you're stuck in a dhyana, get on with it. Get on with the real practice. And the real practice being shamatha and vipassana, especially vipassana. So, keep track of the time. Okay. So we repeat this formula, he says, in order to build real conviction. And we could do that. You could recite this formula if you wish. I don't know of anybody who's been doing this, but maybe there are people. So the basic point of this middle path of accumulation is to rouse yourself to the drum of Dharma, to understand the predicament that we're in, and to hear this proclamation of the possibility of getting out of it. We don't yet know. We don't have any kind of real understanding of what the escape is, of what the alternative is. But we do know that samsara is such an awful, revolting, horrible, frightening mess that we want to get out of it. And so we hear this proclamation and we begin to tread the path more and more. Then we get to the greater path of accumulation. And we're still on the first of the 5 paths. And the practitioner begins to develop not only mindfulness, which is shamatha meditation, that's focus on an object. The virtue of the main virtue of mindfulness meditation, focusing one's attention on an object like the breath, like a mantra, which I think most people who come here, not all, have done before because they practiced in yoga studios, they practiced transcendental meditation, they did MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. All of these are shamatha practices. They have to do with focusing your mind one-pointedly on an object that is in the present moment, like the sound. And in doing that, you bring yourself back from the sorrow, from the suffering, from the angst, and from the pleasure and pain of dreams. We come back from dream into awareness in the present moment. But now we need to go beyond that, because otherwise, if you really practice that, focusing one pointedly on an object, and you spend months and years doing it and getting it better and better, then you wind up in the dhyanas, off in a cave, stuck in a trance. So that's not a good thing. And so what we do is we begin to practice vipassana in combination with the shamatha. The shamatha is the aspect of coming back from dream, and then having come back, we broaden our awareness from one simple point to cover everything, ultimately, absolutely everything. Now, in the beginning, when you practice it, you take that, everything, as an object. But ultimately, you just rest and watch everything arise and pass in this present moment. That's vipassana. That's fine. Either stage, one leads to the next. And then having advanced to vipassana, he says, you now rediscover the virtue of shamatha, because in order to practice this awareness of the present moment, you have to come back from dream again and again. So he talks about two types of effort in joining these two, shamatha and vipassana. This is what we do every day. We did it this evening. We work with the breath as it rises in the body. It leaves the nostrils. It goes out into space, dissolving. And at the end of the out-breath, we're right here in this space, aware of anything and everything. And by anything and everything, I mean not only the objects of the five senses as they arise and pass away in the moment, but the objects of mind, all of them. There's nothing held back. If you think you have a purpose in this meditation, there's something being held back, and that's the purposefulness. And that has to become part of your awareness of meditation. You see, you're giving up any kind of seat, any kind of focal point, any kind of safe ground. And instead, we're just becoming lost in awareness. Awareness of whatever it might be that arises. And we're here for it. And there are two aspects to the kind of effort that go into this. One is called devotion. That's surrendering, or it's the devotional aspect, and we're surrendering to our awareness. And the other is continuity, because when one surrenders to this awareness, here and now, right now, it's continuous. It doesn't stop, ever. The only way it seems to stop is if we get lost in a dream again. And we get caught up in a story, like watching a movie in a theater or on television. We get completely caught up. So this means, he says, you're willing to go along with the practice for the rest of your life. That more and more, we're going to let go into this centerless awareness of vipassana. And the vipassana just deepens and deepens, and it goes completely through the path all the way to the great perfection at the very end. And it changes its name, but the practice is fundamentally the same. It's this practice of resting, coming back to effortless awareness of the space in the present moment. And it's the way in which we move along the path altogether to the second path of unification. The third path, the path of vision, is a deep, sudden experience of this vipassana, a deepening of it. And the fourth path is the application. That's the path of meditation. It's the application of this vipassana. It may change its name, but it's the same practice of awareness. And this becomes the meditation until we reach the fifth path, which is enlightenment. So he says, shamatha vipassana is the way you move from the path of accumulation to the second path of unification. It's also the way we move from the second path of unification to the third path of vision, and so forth. So you combine shamatha and vipassana together with these two types of energy, of effort. Surrendering, which is giving up any focal point, any intentionality, any purpose, and continuity, which is resting in this continuous awareness. And he says in Shamatha Vipassana, we feel the precision of the breath going out. We feel the space in which it goes out. So you don't just focus on the breath, you're here in the space in Shamatha Vipassana. This is the Vipassana, the space. And the breath going out into it is the Shamatha. It's like a line drawn on water. It goes out like you took your finger and made a line on a surface of water, and then it disappears as you go. Or it's like a line drawn on a piece of paper, figure ground. Figure and ground simultaneously, he says. He says this, when the breathing dissolves, it is taking place in the whole universe, and you are, in a sense, nowhere. Finally, you lose the reference point as to who is breathing and where the breathing is dissolving. Desolate space and precision and accuracy simultaneously. Desolate space, precision, and accuracy simultaneously. I mean, that's an incredible description. And he says, and you still have a long way to go. You haven't yet gotten to shunyata, which is the ultimate groundlessness. And we will get there in these second volume of this book. He says, going on, there's still a subtle sense of self because there's this watcher who's appreciating the journey. Oh yeah, I'm letting go now. And then you let go of that. But it keeps reappearing, that subtle sense of a watcher, someone who is gauging the journey and says, yeah, I'm going on, until finally it wears out at the very, very end, and that's enlightenment itself. He says, that is the only security there is, trusting in the truth of the teachings. That's the only security. You begin to become more and more convinced of the truth of these teachings, of how it's each one of our solitary journey. We each have to tread this path alone. We can do it together, but we're fundamentally alone together. He says, the energy of devotion leans toward the practice of precision, seeing things when you let go into space, into awareness, which is the real devotion, then you see things very clearly. The virya of continuity, the energy of continuity, is related with vipassana. In shamatha vipassana, you need them both happening simultaneously. Then he talks about the 4 legs of miracle. And he says you are convinced that developing shamatha vipassana is the way not only to cut the 3 lower realms, that's the hell realm, the realm of the hungry ghosts, and the animal realm, but the kamadhatu, the world of desire, altogether. And it's done with vipassana. These are the 4 legs of miracle. And really what they account for, these 4 legs, are different aspects of your progress on the path. The first being strong interest. He says that this is shamatha vipassana. The conviction is arising, this strong interest, that the only way to proceed is with awareness, coming back into the present moment, aware of absolutely everything. And that effort, the second miracle, is you're working with one-pointedness and space awareness at the same time. Now this is still in the level of the first path. That the one-pointedness is the shamatha, that's the breath going out, and the space awareness is the fact that it's going out into space and dissolving. And that's the effort. And he says combining these two takes a lot of effort. And then there's Trenpa, recollection. Trenpa in Tibetan, Smriti in Sanskrit. And Many of us, when we first came to Buddhism, were familiar with a particular teaching called the Satipatthana Sutra, which is the sutra on mindfulness, on recollection. Smriti in Sanskrit, Sati in Theravada in Pali. And this has to do with being awake and free in the present moment, that we come back. We were lost in a dream and we recollect ourselves. We recollect. We come back into this present moment and see what's happening. That's the recollection. It's not about remembering the details of our life, he says. It is a remembering of the present experience and the past. Even a simple statement such as, there is a car, is not quite free of the past because you know the word car. You've learned it. And then finally, there's investigation, that when you are in a state of shamatha vipassana, when you're practicing it, you're seeing what's going on in yourself and in the world constantly. So there's constant investigation. So he says here at the end, this, the third stage of the path of accumulation, is extremely important. It is the last possibility for an ordinary person to be able to transform himself or herself into a higher person, a noble person. And that means an arhat, a bodhisattva, or a Buddha. It is the only way that you, an ordinary person, could become one of the noble ones. So he says you have a sense of freedom as you progress through this, of liberation and of emancipation. And that comes from the practice of vipassana, of seeing it all, especially what's going on in your mind. He says you discover that you are about to cut the realm of desire and enter the desireless realms. And then you're protected against that. So he says there is no other way. I once asked him if there was any purpose to practicing the dhyanas. And he said only after you have, now these are the concentration states. He said only after you have an excellent understanding of emptiness, because otherwise they're too seductive, you see. And I said, well, what's the virtue of doing it then? And he said, to achieve flexibility of mind. And I understood that to mean that by doing that, you can then understand what all sentient beings, including those who are on the practicing the dhyanas, are going through, because you've experienced it yourself. So we can have a discussion. Uh-oh.
Christy's her hand raised.
All right, just gonna jump out there. Thank you, Barry and John, for this tonight, and just relating all of this to bringing it down to like our everyday world here. I guess I'm just I'm experiencing. Oh, can you? I'm hearing like some back talk on this. Are you hearing that too?
Yes.
Okay. Well, maybe. I mean, it's just kind of a quick question. So if I can just get it out, but it's just about this kind of feeling of sort of like detox from like samsara. I think that's like the only way I kind of know how to talk about it. It just feels like I'm not far enough out of like samsara to I guess I still feel like this like hungover feeling. Like I don't want to go back, but I don't really know sometimes how to move forward. And it can just, I don't know, it just feels kind of heavy. And I just wonder if, does that get better just by continuing to just continuing along? How long does that last? Is, I guess, my question.
4 days, 3 hours, 22 minutes.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. Oh, God. I think the more correct way of doing it, if I could say correct or useful or helpful, is to appreciate the virtues of the teachings and of the practices as you experience them. And as they affect your life, that will pull you in. But there's no way that we have, it's very difficult to measure where we are on the path and, how we're progressing. In fact, we're always, the teachers enjoin us not to do that, not to try it. It's so kind of difficult, if not harmful. But we can enjoy and appreciate the practice of, especially of Vipassana, as it deepens, because it is profound.
Mm-hmm.
When you begin to bring your awareness not only to this world, this changing world, but to your own mind, and begin to realize that there is no center, no unchanging center, that everything, including everything in your head, is constantly fluxing.
That's, I think, where my disorientation comes from, is that is just what you're referring to there. It's just a disoriented feeling of like groundlessness and like spaciousness that is coming fast, and I just kind of feel like I could get like swallowed up by it, or I could, I mean, yeah, I guess that's, and then so I don't know, it's like a limbo space kind of to be in. But
I would say just keep doing the practice. Don't push yourself, and it will just evolve naturally. I mean, there's this, thing that I've quoted so many times, but it was a tagline, and people were putting their emails, a quote from Trungpa Rinpoche, that he said that the bad news is we're falling through centerless space. The good news is there is no ground.
to hit.
Yeah. And that's really, I think, what we're beginning to discover more and more, deeper and deeper, with our shamatha practice, the Vipassana practice, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
Shamatha and Vipassana.
Right, it just goes out, it just keeps going out and out and out,
Can I just put 2 cents here?
Sorry about the static. I don't know why we're getting this. We struggled with this before too.
When I get that feeling of something's swallowing me up, that you refer to, I kind of think that's ego. Ego feels the threat to itself, So I've switched into that perspective of seeing somehow the lack of reference points as a threat.
Thanks. That's great.
Thank you.
That's great, Laura. Yeah, we could bring our awareness to that too.
Like can I clarify, like almost like ego is reacting against that feeling, like like ego is feeling threatened by that, and so it's trying to then get ground back. Is that what you mean, or is that?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Anybody else have a comment about that? Shini, then we'll go with Robert.
Sorry, I don't have a comment. Mine is more of a question. Yeah, I have actually 2 questions about shamatha vipassana practice. The first is in the first paragraph of the Greater Path of Accumulation. He talked about how you begin to realize the limitation of dwelling on vipassana alone, and then you step further and you rediscover shamatha. I wonder, like, what is the limitation of vipassana that he's talking about? That like you see you need to step further to rediscover shamatha. That's the first.
That when you practice Vipassana, you start to get lost in the thoughts. You are giving up a central point. In shamatha, there is a point to hold on to. there is something to relate to. There's the meditator and the object of meditation. See? And that gives you sort of reference points. But when you practice pure vipassana, you're giving up those reference points. It's just space, awareness of whatever happens to be arising. And so we come back to this reference point of the object of meditation and the meditator. It helps at that stage of the path. Ultimately, you give it up. You give up that reference point, the meditator and the object of meditation. And there's just pure awareness, which is what vipassana is. Vipassana is pure, centerless awareness and there's no one being aware. It's just there. It's the nature of reality, of which we all are a part.
So limitation actually comes from the practitioner at this point being carried away by thoughts, just discovering vipassana.
The practitioner is carried away by thoughts, yes. What else?
Yeah, okay. I think I understand what you're saying. My second question is, on the bottom of the page 508, he said that you need to train both shamatha first and then vipassana separately before combining the two, because combining the two takes a lot of effort. But I feel that for me personally, I start with shamatha vipassana practice, and that sort of continues through. So I'm wondering if practicing separately in this sense means more emphasizing on different parts of the shamatha vipassana practice, or I'm not quite sure.
Yes, he changed his approach over the years. And when we first met Trungpa Rinpoche, he was teaching shamatha vipassana as we practice it in this group. And that's the way I learned it from him. And in fact, when we first learned shamatha vipassana, we had never experienced it with any other teachers. And we wondered where it came from. Later, a Dzogchen teacher, a teacher of the Great Perfection, came to Shambhala Mountain Center here in Colorado. It was called Rocky Mountain Dharma Center then. And he was teaching Great Perfection, and suddenly there it was. It came out of the Great Perfection tradition, which is a particular style, a very advanced style of teachings. Now, later, Trungpa Rinpoche began to emphasize shamatha. And that's where I think this chapter is coming in. It's coming in from a later orientation, which I didn't experience. I've always felt that it was unnecessary for me, anyhow, to be teaching shamatha, only for this reason, that so many people, not you, but so many people who come to this group, this path, have already experienced meditation in a yoga studio. They've practiced TM. They've practiced mindfulness-based stress reduction. They have practiced shamatha somewhere. And so it's not necessary for them to do it again with us, and we can go straight into shamatha vipassana. But there are some who come who have never practiced meditation at all. And for those now, especially reading this, I think it would be a good idea, for them to practice some shamatha. Frankly, I practice shamatha, especially at night when I wake up and I can't go back to sleep because my thoughts are spinning, and I find if I practice shamatha, boom, I'm back asleep, because it cuts those anxious thoughts. It's wonderful at that. So I do think it would be good to practice shamatha, and if you want to discuss it, I'm perfectly happy to do that. And you can spend some time practicing shamatha. It's good. It's great. It has, as Organ Chowan taught in his book, Our Pristine Mind, it has 3 virtues. One is that you become familiar with how much you're thinking when you first start to practice trying to focus your mind on an object. You see all your thoughts. The second virtue is that when you do come back to the object of awareness, You get a rest. And he said, it's like having a really good nap. And the third benefit is you begin to develop the muscle of bringing your mind back from dream into awareness. Those are the three main things. That said, I listened to another Tibetan Lama who said shamatha isn't meditation. So go figure, But I think it's a very good thing to practice shamatha. And if there are people here who haven't practiced shamatha, I'd be happy to go over it with you. And you could practice it some. It's excellent. But then you move on to vipassana. And shamatha vipassana, which includes the shamatha. It includes it because you're coming back from dream to an object of awareness, the breath as it goes out.
That's very, very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. It's funny the way Trungpa Rinpoche changed his style. In the beginning, gosh, he was just giving them purely most advanced teachings. And I think he found that people needed to go back, to an earlier version of the teachings, to more fundamental. Who else? Robert, you had a comment.
Thank you. I have two questions. In the context of nothing is permanent, would it be correct to say that impermanence is permanent?
Impermanence is what?
Permanent.
No. Even impermanence is impermanent. It says that in those four versions. Yeah. Nothing to hold on to.
So nothing is permanent.
You can't find it.
When you mentioned that combining one-pointedness and space awareness together requires great effort. Is there a point at which the great effort becomes an obstacle?
I don't think so. The effort really is not in the awareness. The effort is in coming back from dream. That's where the effort lies. When you realize, oh, I was dreaming and now I need to come back. And you come back to awareness. That's the only place that there's a true place for effort. And I guess, you could say that there's a lot of effort required. We sit down on our cushion, right? We do this for an hour and a half, whatever a day, 2 hours a day. That's an effort. And we're making that effort because without it, we would just be completely lost all our day in dream. So we're expressing our willingness, our intention to come back from dream. They say it gets easier.
Yeah, it's all giving up. And then giving up, and then giving up.
When you get to the highest teachings, the Dzogchen teachings, they're all about the two practices. One of them is simply resting in awareness. And they call that, in the Dzogchen teachings, they call that the lazy person's approach to enlightenment. There's another practice that is part of Dzogchen, which is sort of an alternative. You can do both, you can do one. And that one is for the energetic person. But really, Vipassana, as it plays out, as it gets more and more refined, as you become more and more adept, is the lazy person's approach to enlightenment, because it takes less and less and less effort, and at its best, it is utterly effortless. It is the natural state. That's a quote from the teachings. It's what we are. It's our Buddha nature. That's why this practice in this chapter that he gave was so, I thought that chapter that Barry covered, was so extraordinary. You should go back and take a look at it again. His description of impermanence is really something. I mean, I just, when I read that chapter, I realized that I have always thought of impermanence as being the fact that everything out there, externally, changes. And then when he said that it has this psychological valence, then I realized what he was talking about was that everything in your mind, the way in which you see the world and yourself and everything, is changing second by second. Talk about having nothing to hold on to. One minute we're elated, the next minute we're sad, the next minute we're energetic, the next minute we're sleepy. I mean, my God, it goes on and on and on. What's for dinner? What'll I do after dinner? Oh my God.
Yeah, I've heard the statement, there is no out there.
That's great.
It's all a reflection.
I like that. There is no out there.
There's no out there.
Yeah, wow.
To be able to, what is it? There's a saying by Chuang Tzu. The perfect man employs his mind as a mirror. It grasps nothing, it refuses nothing, it receives but does not keep.
I couldn't hear. We're having trouble with Zoom. Sorry, the perfect man sees his mind as the.
If you shut up, if you mute your side while I'm talking, maybe you can hear me.
Okay, I muted.
The perfect man employs his mind as a mirror. It grasps nothing. It refuses nothing. It receives but does not keep.
That was Zhuangzi?
Chuang Tzu, yeah.
Yeah, Zhuangzi. Yeah.
600.
Huh?
600.
Yeah, 600, 7th century. Yeah, he was a great sage. Chinese sage.
One of the first phrases I ever came in contact with in this work. It's very profound. And what you had said about trusting in the truth of the teaching is the only security there is. It gives weight to the taking refuge.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, friends, if for some reason where people seem to be reluctant to speak, maybe this material is just so earth-shattering.
Maybe we're all just stunned.
Fun?
That's what Wednesday's for.
I got something.
Dan.
Yeah. It's not. I don't know how much I really have to say about it, but just something from the reading that, and it's related to what it's related to everything. Obviously, we were just talking about. But under the 3 marks of existence, under the impermanence, he says, in order to realize the impermanence of something, you first need to see the value and appreciate it.
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry, we're getting this.
Try muting yourself again, John. See if that makes
I
it.
will.
Go
Under
ahead.
the 3 marks of existence, when he's talking about impermanence, he says, in order to realize the impermanence of something, you first need to see its value and appreciate it. And that just seems like a really important point. It just kept at me, in the reading, and it's sometimes when I'm working with addicts or in recovery, it's like I really get them to try to focus on what did the drugs do for you. You're not going to be able to overcome this unless you can fully accept what they did for you. And it's the same thing with the ego. It's very hard to, it's hard to give up something that's purpose is to entertain you and to keep you entertaining. But we have to acknowledge that. We have to acknowledge how much it does for us before we can even begin to attempt to let it go. Like that.
What do you think about this aspect, that ego is self-justifying, self-perpetuating? In other words, when you say its purpose is to entertain you, that you is ego. It's only ego that by entertaining, it keeps itself alive. And when you give up entertainment, ego evaporates.
Yes.
And an unentertained ego is a very unhappy ego, right? Which is another form of entertainment. That's something else for ego to do.
Be unhappy.
To be unhappy.
Yeah.
I'm so unhappy. Oh. I just remember Trungpa Rinpoche saying, you can't kill yourself. And I had these huge arguments. Of course you can. You point a gun at your head, pull the trigger, you kill yourself. And he said, no. He said, ego's going to be there, the killer. That's a tough one. Well, friends, it's 7 o'clock. And you can ponder all this, and we'll have a discussion tomorrow night. I hope it's as well attended as the previous ones have been. They were really terrific, I thought. A lot of fun. So, is Sarah here? I think, yes, she is. Anything burning anyone wants to say before we do the closing chant? Dedicate the merit? And when we dedicate the merit, we're giving up our ego. We're giving up the merit attained through this, all the work we've done here, the readings and the discussion and all that, for the benefit of all sentient beings. So it's a kind of a double bonum, a good thing, 2 good things. One is we're giving up our egos, and the second thing is we're benefiting others.
I'd like to dedicate the merits to my friend Bill Tritaros, who passed away on Friday at 12:50 p.m.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Shall we have cacophony here? No. I guess we don't do that tonight. We don't do a cacophony. Okay.
Well.
Okay. Sarah?
You have to unmute.
Hi.
Yeah, you might be muted.
John said it really well, but we will close by dedicating the merit earned by our practice for the benefit of all sentient beings. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigden's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy a profound, brilliant glory.
Good night, everybody.
Thank
On mute.
you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Barry.
Barry.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Sarah.
Uh,
Dan.
Thank you, everybody.
Great job, Sarah.
Hasta mañana.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah.
Restful night.
Hi, Judith
Night.
and Christy. Thank you for your comments, Christy and Robert. You're both excellent. Okay.
You're only as good as people who are listening. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.